gentlemen, I'm Dr. Ritho Mwaniki from Tangaza University College in Nairobi. Welcome to this year's conference of European Academy of Religion. And my presentation is entitled Churches and Nationalism in Kenya in the 1950s, concentrating on colonial politics, state missions patronage, and Christian witness. Welcome. I start by pointing out that Kenya became a British protectorate in 1895 and in 1920 was elevated to a British colony. The establishment of colonial rule in Kenya coincided with the arrival of European missionaries who introduced Christianity and formal education for the Africans. The Catholic Church had reached in the Kenyan soil back in 1498 when Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama landed at Malindi accompanied by some Catholic missionaries who evangelized the Islamic town of Malindi. Protestantism, on the other side, landed on the Kenyan soil in 1844 when a German Lutheran preacher, John Ludwig Graf, opened a mission at Rabai near Mombasa. However, the sheer dawn of evangelization would only rise with the Berlin West Africa Conference of 1884 when different European powers entered Africa, providing a new base for evangelization under the protection and patronage of the new colonial powers. And consequently, the birth of evangelization in Kenya coincided with the establishment of British colonial rule. The year 1950s remained crucial both to the expansion of Christianity in Kenya, but more for shaping the nationalistic ideas that gave rise to the Republic of Kenya. One of the most remarkable outcomes of missionary education was the production of African nationalists. With the emergence of the Second World War, all political parties in Kenya were banned. Since these nationalists no longer had a clear channel for airing their grievances, they created an underground movement that later came to be called the Mau Mau movement that resorted to a fierce war with the British colonial government from 1952 to 1959. During this struggle, the Christian churches played a very vital role, just as they did during the entire colonial system. Therefore, with this background, my presentation sets to achieve the following objectives. 1. To evaluate how these churches during the colonial Kenya influenced the life of the people by their interventions within the colonial politics of an oppressive regime. 2. To assess the collaboration that existed between the colonial government and the churches and how it was perceived by the Africans. 3. To discuss the various positions that were taken by the churches during the Mau Mau Emergency War and how they shaped the nationalistic ideas. And 4. To examine the Christian witness during the Mau Mau War divided between loyalty to Jesus Christ and loyalty to the British colonial rule. Therefore, the question is, were the churches silent before the grievances aired by the Africans? Right from the beginning, the colonial rule was never accepted by the Africans, who lamented because the British settlers alienated their land. They also lacked representation in the Colonial Legislative Council, and at the same time, they forced the Kipande system on all the male Africans and created huge forced taxation while denying the Africans of their personal freedom. So, did these churches ever intervene for the good of the Africans, or were they mere collaborators with the colonial oppressors? Indeed, I argue, they intervened, especially the Protestants who enjoyed a more privileged position than the Catholics. And I can show this one, citing 4 examples. The first intervention was in 1918 when the governor, Sir Edward Northey, issued the Resident Native Labourers Ordinance, endeavoring to create a stable supply of labor for the White Highlands by introducing a publicly supervised contract of agricultural labor. When the same governor wanted to compel the Africans to work for the white settlers and directed the protectorate officials to exert every effort to this purpose, the Protestants, through the Alliance of Protestant Missions led by the secretary, Dr. John Arthur, they highly opposed this pro-settler policy. They intervened, and the colonial office in London acted by ordering colonial officials not to take part in recruiting laborers for private employment. The second intervention was in their efforts in forming the early African political leaders and political parties. Haridhuku, for example, was a product of the Methodist Mission School at Kambui, and Jomo Kenyatta, the future first president of the Republic of Kenya, was a product of missionary education as well. The first political party, that is the Kikuyu Association, was in fact formed with the help of prominent European missionaries in Kiambu who sought to establish themselves as the representatives of Africans' public opinion in central Kenya. History, we certainly remember some of them, like Reverend Henry Hopper and the Archdeacon Owen, in their efforts to champion for the rights of the Africans against the white settlers' demands for more Africans' labor, land, and tax. The third intervention was before the Devonshire Declaration of 1923, the fruit of a long controversy that existed between the European settlers and the Indians, with the former attempting to exclude the Indians from having any say in policy and administration of the colony. The 1923 Devonshire White Paper Declaration from the Colonial Office solved the conflict between the Europeans and the Indians by reminding them that Kenya belonged to neither of them. I quote, "Primarily, Kenya is an African territory. The interests of the African natives must be paramount." End of quote. The British government was in Kenya, therefore, to make the territory develop on behalf of the Africans. In this Indian question, the interest of the settlers against the Indians and those of the missionaries for the welfare of the Africans coincided. The settlers lobbied successfully for missionary support, and the missionaries accepted. The fourth intervention that I can quote was in connection with the missionaries' representation in the Legislative Council. In 1923, Reverend John Arthur was nominated with the Legislative Council because the missionaries had exercised a lot of pressure on the colonial government for an African representation. Although the Africans wanted their own representative, the tenure of Arthur and later that of Reverend Leonard Beecher were very superlative as they fought extremely hard in pressing the government for a fair play. It is therefore evident that the privilege enjoyed by the Protestant missions during the colonial government did not make them ignore the problems faced by the Africans. They indeed lobbied for policies that would benefit the Africans. However, although the churches always fought for the good of the Africans amidst an oppressive regime, when it came to the Mau Mau War of Independence, the situation was different. Frightened by the new phenomenon known as the Mau Mau, the Catholic Church was the first to take possession of the Mau Mau movement. Her positions were influenced by the aspect of communism that was spreading in Europe and threatening to destroy all religions. Consequently, the bishops interpreted the tendencies of the Mau Mau as communism in Kenya. Before the declaration of the state of emergency by Governor Sir Everett Barin in October 1952, the Bishop of Nyeri, Charles Cavalera, and his Nairobi counterpart, J.J. McCarthy, they issued two separate declarations condemning the Mau Mau movement. The members who were adhering to the movement were declared excommunicated from the Catholic Church. However, a closer reading of the two pastoral letters by the bishops indicates that the two bishops did not condemn the nationalistic ambitions of the Mau Mau members, but they condemned the movement in as much as it was felt to be setting a clear threat to the Church of Christ and to the Christians. Having condemned the Mau Mau with the two letters, the violence against the Christians, the missions, and the missionaries escalated. The church had to struggle for the better part of 1952 in trying to maintain a balance that was no longer possible to sustain in those days. In the Protestant side, they depended mostly on the Christian Council of Kenya, CCK, in airing their positions. Nonetheless, the very first interventions came from a separate base of individuals. It was at the Kambui Mission in Kiambu, where an extraordinary meeting was held in mid-August 1952, where the Kikuyu Christian elders and ministers, both Catholics and Protestants, came together in a rare gesture of unity and denounced the Mau Mau movement. In this memorable Kambui meeting, the elders and ministers, calling themselves the Army of Christ, they signed the paper on which was written their promise against the Mau Mau movement. Just like the Catholics, the Protestants, through the Christian Council of Kenya, claimed to be against the Mau Mau because of the means they had chosen to achieve their purpose. They made it clear that the struggle is one, not between Africans and Europeans, but between the forces of good and evil. The Mau Mau was therefore judged as a spiritual movement belonging to the devil and therefore fundamentally anti-Christian. In September 1952, the Presbyterian Church issued a declaration as well concerning the Mau Mau movement that was to be read in all their churches and to be published. In this declaration, their synod was rejecting the Mau Mau movement and everything that stood for the movement, thus warning her members against having any connection with the movement because, I quote, "it hinders instead of helping forward the achievements of the just rights of the African people, and because it makes impossible any good race relations in the colony." End of quote. Nevertheless, the advantaged position of the Protestants with the colonial government played a paramount role during the execution of the military laws introduced with the emergency. This consciousness was triggered by the person of Canon Cecil Beres, who loved and supported the Kikuyu people and their churches and tried to maintain their human rights at a time of intense debate and some oppression. With continuous news of mistreatment of Africans by those responsible for law and order, the CMA's general offices in London sent to Kenya Canon Cecil Beres, who managed to grasp the whole picture of how they were misusing the martial powers at the expense of the innocent Africans. He intervened by pressing the colonial government to put order among those responsible. And on the other hand, the Christian Action Group, which was under the CCK, and the chair of the outspoken Reverend David Steele, it held a meeting on 4th January 1955, where they expressed their profound dissatisfaction with the system of detention camps and the welfare of the detainees in those camps. Listing the injustices committed, they decided to prepare a memorandum for further protests to the colonial government. And basing his arguments on the acts accomplished after Operation Anvil, Reverend Steele will complain of how the government had thrown innocent people into detention camps, mixing them with the wicked. He therefore expressed extraordinarily strong criticism regarding the conduct of the anti-Mau Mau campaign and called for an examination of the legal positions that had been taken during the emergency period. And therefore, despite the churches having taken radical positions on the Mau Mau movement, when the counterinsurgency of the Mau Mau war escalated, they were the same churches to fight for the welfare of the Africans by both defending them from the same colonial government and providing the Africans with material needs like food, clothing, and medication. But the tricky question remained in the type of the relationship that existed between the missionaries and the colonial authorities. Their collaboration before and during the Mau Mau revolt was a fundamental accusation by the Africans, a belief that determined the relationship between the locals and the churches. Central to this accusation was the affirmation of a hitherto Kikuyu thesis that there is no difference between the colonialist and the missionary. The collaboration between the colonial government and the missionary churches in Kenya did not resemble the European medieval alliance between the altar and the crown, but given the historical context in which Christianity penetrated Africa, the practice of mutual dependency between the colonial state and missionary churches was inevitable to ensure smooth running of their missions. Each needed the other. The missionary therefore preferred collaboration instead of open conflict with the settlers. However, as we have observed earlier, they were more and seriously inclined to safeguard the interests of the Africans against the colonial government and the settlers. Before and during the Mau Mau rebellion, the setup of this collaboration changed. The alliance between the church and the state during the Mau Mau insurgency was more of a movement of common ideas shared between the European missionaries and the colonizers. This was possible because, from the onset of their arrival, they shared a common mission. This collaboration during the Mau Mau emergency followed a specific pattern that guaranteed the defeat of the Mau Mau. Since imperialism in Africa was based on the three principles of commerce, civilization, and Christianity, both the colonialists and the missionaries had a specific role to play in the accomplishment of this dream. When the Mau Mau uprising tended to maim the efforts of this dream, this generated a common enemy that justified the unity between the churches and the colonialists in a combined effort to eliminate this enemy called Mau Mau. And this collaboration was first on the ideological interpretations of the Mau Mau movement, like believing that it was communist-inspired, that it was an evil that needed to be crushed through counter-oathing, and the churches giving open declarations against the Mau Mau movement, and the eventual rehabilitation process to reform the errant Africans. These ideas will be turned into concrete actions like the resistance to the Mau Mau through the creation of the Home Guards, which was an original creation by the churches, and in the collaboration through colonial chiefs, a system that was never accepted by the Africans. All this was accomplished in collaboration between the Christian churches and the colonial state. With this belief of the collaboration between the colonialists and the churches, the Mau Mau War, with the earlier forced oathings, witnessed majority of the African Christians abandon the Christian life, especially participation in the life of the missions and the sacraments. The churches emptied continuously, especially from mid-1952, and Christianity seemed endangered. Either out of fear or out of conviction, many Christians therefore abandoned the church. However, by the end of the emergency in 1960, Christianity in Kikuyu land and in Mau Mau zones had demographically doubled, if not tripling. In the real sense, Africans were never against Christianity as a religion and her message, but they had been hurt by behaviors of some churches and Christian settlers. For example, the churches were not innocent of the issue of taking away the ancestral lands from the Africans, while at the same time, though good-intentioned, they attacked some of the traditional customs and taboos that were very dear to the Kikuyu people, like the issue of female circumcision. The rivalry between the Protestants and the Roman Catholics was another big scandal to the Africans, while their collaboration with the state made the Africans believe that the missionary and the colonizer were the same. And in this case, the struggle towards nationalism in Kenya created a difficult choice between the African Christians and the emerging African nationalists. All the Africans, both the Christians and the non-Christians, they dreamt of liberation, but they differed on the right path to follow. And given that the success of colonialism in Kenya was built on the policy of divide and rule, the same policy became the weapon that defeated Mau Mau. The Europeans, who included the church leaders, administrators, and settlers, were all very united in fighting the Mau Mau. The most devoted African Christians belonged to the conservative wing, which went along with the evaluation of the ideas of the churches, judging Mau Mau as the dark forces that could only be challenged and defeated by Christianity. The dilemma that ensued among the Christian Africans was created by the transforming paradigm between a political affair that slowly became a moral ethical issue of whether the end justified the means. The question divided the consciences of the Africans, leading to the success of their oppressors. For a Kikuyu and Anglican Bishop Obadiah Kariuki, the Christians would have liked to do their part in sending away the white man and obtain independence since all Africans were suffering. However, while the aim of the Mau Mau was a good one, the problem was the means they used, thus making it impossible for Christians to join. The moral ethical concern created a dilemma, since from the Christian point of view, the best appeal would have been dialogue and reconciliation, which for the Mau Mau was already overdue. The fact is that the issue was too complex for whichever decision the Christians would have taken, joining the war as the Mau Mau movement wanted, or not joining as they did. It was or would have been contentious. Many staunch Christians therefore decided never to join the movement, and a good number opted to die rather than take the mandatory Mau Mau oath. For Bishop Obadiah Kariuki, the Mau Mau fighters and the Christians who shed their blood both contributed in bringing back peace in Kenya, and it was their blood that nourished the tree of freedom, for both did shed their blood to bring change in Kenya. True nationalism, therefore, involved distinguishing between loyalty to Jesus Christ and loyalty to the British colonialists, for even those Christians who were primarily loyal to Christ, also endeavored to see Kenya liberated from the British crown. Loyalism to Jesus Christ was not the same as loyalism to British government, but they were interrelated due to the relationship that existed between the churches and the British administration. The reconciliation between the two was, however, an open conflict that created division and loss of life for many Christians who, by opting loyalty to Christ, seemed, in the eyes of the nationalists, to have ignored the primary goal of defending their motherland. In conclusion, colonialism without Christianity would have been even more disastrous. However, Christianity suffered due to the matrix in which it was presented in Africa, that is, through the paternalism of colonial rule. Nevertheless, we must admit that the greater makers of today's Kenya were not the colonial exploiters, but the missionaries who, despite some human failings, were sincerely committed to the holistic good of the Africans, and therefore their altruistic acts of human promotion and planting the seeds of Christianity in Africa can never be undermined. From the onset of colonial rule in Kenya, the churches were never silent to the predicaments of the Africans, and this is demonstrated by the various interventions made to the colonial state, especially by the Protestant churches, who are better positioned to do it more than the Catholic Church, less positioned in a British colony. These Christian churches played a very vital role during the entire colonial system and the emerging nationalists in Kenya. Almost all the leading nationalists were fruits of the education brought by the missionaries, and furthermore, the earliest political parties formed by these nationalists were supported and assisted by the missionaries who wanted the Africans to fight for their rights in recognized unions. Nationalism went hand in hand with Christianity, whereby, by the end of the Mau Mau revolt, majority of the citizens had embraced Christianity after realizing the great help that was offered by the churches, especially in the detention camps and in the villagization. The churches during the colonial Kenya, therefore, influenced the life of the people amidst an oppressive colonial regime, and they shaped the struggle for independence, the future of independent Kenya, and Christianity as a religion of the majority of the Kenyans. Thank you.